Welcome. My name's Troy Pano, and I'm the president here at the University of Mary Washington. And very excited to have you in our wonderful digital auditorium here for this evening's keynote, but also here for the Summer Institute. I believe this is our third year of hosting the Summer Institute, if I'm not mistaken, but I'm proud that now we have made a significant investment to formalize our relationship with the digital laboratory, pedagogy laboratory. I always get those words mixed up, too many words for me. And we did this because digital learning is a part of Mary Washington's strategic vision. And we are so excited to have all of you here to be a part of this conversation about how we can incorporate digital technology to enable our teaching and learning in a very humane and empathetic way. This is something that we're passionate about here in terms of incorporating this into our liberal arts mission. We think this is not only the future, but it's the present. We think this improves our teaching and learning. We should access this in a way that helps move us forward and prepare students who are going to make a difference in the world and in the 21st century. And if we're not introducing them to digital learning, we probably are not doing our job. So we are excited to be hosts, and we hope that we host this for years to come. We are going to continue to make this investment in the future. We think that this facility that you are in sort of embodies and reflects our own commitment to this, and so we welcome you. We understand there are people from all over the world here to learn from one another. So thank you for coming here to Fredericksburg and to the campus of Mary Washington, and I hope that you have a very productive next, couple days here together, learning from one another. So thank you very much, and have a great time.
Thank you, Troy. How are you all doing after your first day? Yeah? Good? Yay! Oh, wow! Applause and everything. That's amazing. That's fantastic. Cool. Well, I'm here to introduce our keynote speaker. I've written down a few comments here. A formal introduction of Anya Kamenetz, the kind of introduction that we're used to at academic conferences, this not being the kind of academic conference we're used to. That list of accomplishments and publications and awards and degrees would be impressive enough. For example, Anya was named a 2010 Game Changer in Education by the Huffington Post, received 2009, 2010, and 2015 national awards for education reporting from the Education Writers Association, and won an Edward R. Murrow Award for Innovation in 2017. She's published 4 books about higher education, technology, and their effects on each other and our lives, and growth as human beings. And she's contributed to everything from the New York Times to O Magazine. But what I think I appreciate the most about Anya is her centering of the human in all that she does. Whether she's reporting on teacher unions and teacher walkouts, college for adult learners, affirmative action, or most recently, parenting in the digital age, Anya's clear concern is with people, with the very human stories lived out in front of and behind screens, in large and small communities, at all levels of education. In her work, Anya pays little heed to the divisions of K-12 and higher education, appreciating instead the need for all learners to occupy safe, equitable spaces where they can thrive. Anya's writing is on point. Her acute insights as a reporter challenge and inspire, and even when reporting on matters that are mysterious, intense, or depressing, her writing abides with hope. From reading her work, I have found an honesty that gives me the sense that maybe we might just be okay. Please welcome Anya Kamenetz.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you guys so much for having me here. I'm really, really pleased. I noticed you avoided the front row. I don't know if you're worried I'm going to do some kind of blue man group thing, but I'm not that innovative. I'm sorry. I'm working on upping my keynote game, but I do have to say that I worked really hard on this talk for a long time. This is a brand new talk for you guys. I'm a little bit nervous about it because I really do feel like digital pedagogy and the community that you guys have built. I've been in touch, followed this work for several years, and it's really, really important. It's actually, I think it might be crucial right now, and I'm going to go through some of the reasons why. But I kind of feel like, I'm not one of you. I'm an education journalist, and I always quote the line Eugene Levy in Waiting for Guffman. He says, well, he's supposed to be a comic actor, right? And he's like, were you the class clown? He's like, well, no, I wasn't the class clown, but I sat next to the class clown and I studied him. That's me. I'm just like following behind and taking notes and trying to figure out and translate what's going on. So yeah, I'm really here asking for your help in thinking through some of these questions, because I really think we're at this inflection point, maybe, where, for many years, for me, at least for a decade, I've been thinking about what can technology do for education, but I almost feel like we're at a point where another really important question, perhaps equally important, maybe more important, is what can educators do for technology? How can you help learners think through and design and improve the world of technology? I'm taking you through a thought experiment, if you'll stay with me. This moment, I don't remember when everything really started to pivot. For you, it might have been different. Obviously, for a lot of people, it was the last election, but people started to ask kind of, what if we rot? And I do talk about in my new book about this idea of technological adolescence, which Carl Sagan talked about in actually the anniversary edition of Cosmos in 1990. He said these things, which way are we going to go, basically? And he relates it to, the famous kind of Fermi, the paradox of, the infinite universe. Why haven't we found aliens yet? Why haven't they found us? One potential very depressing answer to that mystery is when civilizations become sufficiently advanced to reach other civilizations or other planets, there's a pinch point and they veer off into destruction of some kind. And that's the explanation for why. And he's saying, well, possibly we can get through this adolescence, and it's kind of up to all of us. And, there's a lot at stake here. This is one of my two daughters. You guys all have young people that you care about. There's a lot at stake here if we figure this stuff out or not. So as I've been thinking through this, I've been trying to figure out for a long time a way to talk about the fact that there's this explosion in what they call machine learning. And it sort of started to occur to me that the best schools in America right now are probably schools for robots. I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think the best schools in America are schools for robots, and then we can kind of maybe use that as a way to think about how schooling could evolve, right? That's my husband, by the way. He's working in an AI startup, and he's training a robot. So number one, why the best schools are for robots. It's a really good job. Teaching robots is a really good job. It's very well respected. It's very well paid. There's lots and lots of opportunities. It just seems to be one of the hot jobs out there that a lot of people want. Number two, why AI, schools for robots, machine learning as a discipline is advancing very quickly, because they think about it as learning science, right? So they are doing research. They are checking each other's research. They're coming together all the time in groupings like this. It's not novel to think about how can we get better and better and better and better and better at teaching and learning with robots. I'm using robots, widely, obviously. Number three, an interesting thing about how machine learning works right now is that sort of every single AI project is a little bit different. There's no uniform process for it. There certainly isn't a set of common standards for what machines should be learning. In fact, every project is a little bit different. It's also super creative. There's so many AI challenges that are around things like, can AI tell jokes? Can AI compose music? Can it identify photographs? This is one that was built by a guy named Dan Macnish using a data set that was contributed to by millions of people, where they had people doodle things. And so this is like an AI camera that looks at scenes, it identifies the scenes, and that it issues you a drawing that relates to the scene. So it's like a doodle bot. It's physical, and it's really interesting because it's like, it can only, categorizes things really loosely. So it could look at a picture of your beautiful avocado toast and spit out a picture of a hot dog. But that's okay. I mean, the point is thinking through these problems, and Microsoft has also a drawing, an image generator that works entirely differently with verbal description. And so there's just endless numbers of these. They're often creative, they're often funny, and they're customized for each individual, right? Number 4, this is a really interesting technical point. So, advances in machine learning kind of, there was this early generation of AI where they were kind of like, we're going to very carefully, in the 1960s, just very, bluntly, and many of you may know much more about this than I do, but early generations of AI, they were like, well, we'll design really, really complicated systems and we'll kind of specify each step along the way. Other people said, no, we need to have this like brute force, just attack it with a lot of information, and that was not feasible until the advent of networked computing, of the kind of chips on computers that were used for visual processing, invented for video gaming, and that created these neural networks, which were lots of computers that kind of worked together, and suddenly the somewhat brute force approach to solving problems becomes more feasible. But the interesting insight about it is that what they don't do is they don't specify. So they don't specify the path to a goal. They specify the outcome, and then there's heuristics. And an example of a really broad heuristic is take big steps when you're far away from the goal and take smaller steps when you're closer to the goal. So these are problem-solving rules that you impart to the machine, and then you kind of allow it to arrive at its own solution, right? And interestingly, there's this very famous paper that kind of compares the process to annealing metal. So if you're getting to a goal, there's a lot of randomness on the way. And if you just proceed in one direction, you may end up at a local maximum or a local minimum, depending on where you're going. But, so what you do is you kind of take jumps in both directions, and there's randomness as you go around. And this is similar to annealing metal, and what annealing metal is, you're getting it to withstand better force, more energy. And the way that you do it is you have to heat it up and cool it down, and heat it up and cool it down until it gets to this kind of optimal state. So point simply being that we're not trying to teach them, we're not assuming that we know how they're going to arrive at the solution. We're leaving room, right? Or another way of looking at this, obviously, is that we're building mistakes into the process, right? So this is a YouTube video of DeepMind AI, and basically, this is very much similar to like the Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, like if you want people to build ships, you don't just tell them what to do, but you teach them to long for the sea. Well, they taught this AI to long for point B, and it started out at point A, and it just started going, and it made mistakes and fell along the way. It kind of evolved walking in this way. And if you've seen the videos, they're really hilarious because like jumps and falls, and they sort of run in this weird slaloming way. But mistakes, definitely. Surprises, definitely. Sometimes they are, there's room to move around, and there's room for mistakes. Another thing that's really, really important to how computers are learning, obviously they're learning in collaboration with other computers, neural networks, that's pretty clear. But what they're also learning to do is they're learning to communicate with us much better. So a big whole area of AI is, interpreting our speech, interpreting sign language, interpreting motions and gestures. And the ultimate goal is that we're going to have human-computer combinations that are like centaurs, right? Centaurs part horse, part person. Human AI collaborations are going to be better than both. And this is one of the reasons it's kind of facile to talk about AI replacing people. Nearly always what you're going to get is an AI plus a person is better than an AI alone. AI replaces people only when you don't care about quality, or you care only about cost, and that happens because of capitalist considerations, not necessarily because of performance considerations. So the idea that we're going to replace people right away tends to fall short again and again. But we're teaching them communication. That's really key. Really interestingly, so we're constantly homeschooling the AI all the time, right? The reason AI is getting so much smarter is part of the reason that AI is getting so much smarter is because of this vast world of network data that we're all living in. And so, like 5 years ago, it's trying to figure out is this a cat or not a cat, and now it's trying to identify 5,000 species. Or, why is it that there's an incredibly cute Draw This, which is a Google thing, where it's like, it asks you to draw a picture, and then the machine tries to recognize what the picture is of. So we're constantly mechanical turking. We're constantly feeding the AI our information, and repeating them unlimited amounts of information. And this is, problematic from a social perspective. If you think about it from an educational perspective, it's a really interesting approach. Hey, there's information everywhere, and things that computers need to know is being generated all the time, and we're all kind of participating. It's everybody's job to make the computer smarter, whether you know it or not. You are working on the project of making computers smarter all the time, probably right now. So finally, one of the reasons that the best schools right now for computers are for computers is that they have this very lofty and fascinating goal, right? The goal is not only to create an amazing workforce that is ready to be gainfully employed, but it is this goal, general intelligence, right? So what they're trying to do is they're trying to create intelligences that can handle unforeseen challenges, right? That can solve humanity's direst problems, that can make solving and becoming better humans. I don't know if that means better humans than us, but but creative solutions for multi-domain tasks. This is the ultimate goal. It's not narrowly defined, right? We're giving them little challenges now, like drawing doodles and making music and and walking in a simulation. But we are ultimately hoping that they're going to far surpass anything that we can imagine, and they're going to solve the world's problems. And that kind of level of faith and hope and trust in our computers is something that it would be great for every teacher to have in a student, and it would be great for every student to feel that a teacher had in them, I think. So that's a thinking through of these funny ideas about why are we engaged in this project, right? Yeah, it's really cool and interesting, but it really makes you wonder, right? Why, as a species or as a civilization, or perhaps just as a bunch of corporations in developed countries, are we so engaged and invested in the future of artificial intelligence? Why are we not investing in the same way in people who have manifestly more aptitude for these challenges, right? Children are better at all of these things. They're better at singing songs. They're better at walking. They're better at drawing little pictures, right? They're better at telling jokes and being funny. They're better potentially at saving the planet and in addressing humanity's direst challenges. Why are we not investing in them? That's not a technical question, that's a moral question, right? And that said, I'm not suggesting that we replace, we model all of our schools off of AI challenges, because there's ways in which we need to do better with people. And there's ways in which these strategies won't work with people the way they do with computers, right? So really obviously, right, we can't just tell the people what to care about or what to do. They have to want it. We have to help them see what they want. We also have to form relationships with the people that we teach. There's no way around that. And this really interesting point that kind of relates to both is people are kind of afraid of AI. The people working on it and the people who aren't working on it but who are in the technology field especially are really kind of afraid of it. They're afraid of what it might do. They're afraid of the potential. They think it might be really powerful. And powerful in a way that's alien from us, that its interests diverge from our interests. And that just strikes me as a really interesting parallel to questions that come up all the time in K-12 and higher ed, which are questions about equity, which have to do with the difference between how we see ourselves and how we see our students. Or if we feel like our students are very different from us, that they may want very different things, or we don't know what it is that they want, and we're not sure that they're invested in our goals or that we're invested in their goals. And I would posit here, if there's a moral problem, why are we investing so hard in the computers and not so hard in the people? That maybe be more solidarity with the computers than we do with the generation of young people that's growing up right now. That there's some kind of failure of vision, that we are afraid of the children, or that we think that they're too different from us and therefore we don't care about them the same way. This is a really tough question. This is a question about autonomy, right? Like, who gets to determine whose interests are the most important, and how are we distributing these resources over the general realm of learning? Really big questions, not questions that we're going to answer right here. But I want to talk about this centaur idea a little bit more, because the AI project is not slowing down. It seems to have this incredible momentum. And I think what it asks educators of humans to do is potentially think a little bit more about specializing and adopting this idea that we're bigger than the sum of our parts, that the AI project is going to go on and the human intelligence project is also going to go on, and maybe they can borrow from each other and learn from each other. But this is from a piece I wrote a while ago based on an Oxford University study about skills that computers are just consistently bad at, or that robots are just consistently bad at. These are the 4. They are making a sandwich, giving a hug, telling a story, and solving a mystery. Okay, so making a sandwich is about this physical 3D space stuff that toddlers are still better at than robots. There was a really interesting feature just today, I think on the New York Times, about robot hands and different kinds of robot hands, and they showed one making a bed. It still takes it like 10 minutes to make a bed. It's really bad with things that are unpredictable in 3D space. Unfortunately, making a sandwich, unless you are, a renowned chef, it's not very well paid. So a lot of these physical jobs, they tend to be less well paid, less respected, but they may change. I mean, the jobs that require physical presence or that have an element of physical presence are important, and the disciplines that include those are important just for basic reasons, not just because they're good jobs. Giving a hug. So we relate to our computers and we have emotional relationships with them, but we are even better at doing that with humans, right? Humans hopefully have more empathy. They can make you laugh more easily. They can reassure you. They can make you feel calmer. So, if you think about the separation of powers, right, the AI radiologist might spot the cloud on a scan, but you really need a person to sit down and tell you what your prognosis is, help you think through the treatment options, hand you a tissue. Telling a story is about going through and finding a through line in a whole lot of undifferentiated information. So figuring out what's meaningful, what's important. And you can think about this all the time. I mean, a really simple example is a microphone. So I use microphones a lot. What you don't realize is that as a human being with your ears, you are so adapted to fine-tune and zone in on what's important in an environment, whether that be your name or just human voices in general, and to tune out the things that are less important. Microphones don't know how to do that. They pick up every sound. And so it's incredibly distracting when you listen to something that was recorded because they don't know what's important and what's not. And teaching them that is very, very hard. If you have a hearing aid or know someone who wears a hearing aid, this is a really difficult problem. But finding meaning in an undifferentiated sea of data is perhaps one of the most important skills, especially as we start to be in this world of ever-increasing loads of information. And then solving a mystery is a little bit the reverse of that, right? So remember how I said that one of the amazing things about Robot School is that all the little robots get their own little creative and funny and customized challenges. It's people who make those up, right? There's not an AI that can create really cool challenges for other AI yet. So figuring out what it is we should be wanting, what it is we should be looking for, what is that point B that we're trying to get to, the moral decisions, the ethical decisions, the decisions that are, picking what's beautiful, what's right. Those are human, very, very, very human, deeply human abilities. Okay, so how can schools support these 4 human attributes, the human specializations? Number 1, pretty simple, right? Through physical space, through hands-on learning. We use this metaphor all the time, hands-on learning. Great. How can schools support your giving a hug abilities, right? Communication skills, rhetoric skills, debate skills, conflict resolution skills, circles, advisories, restorative justice practices, social and emotional insight, learning about your own learning, metacognition, learning about emotions, about development, about trauma, teaching that's trauma-informed, giving people lessons in their own resilience, in their own brain, how it works, insights. Seeing your job as being emotionally relating to the students and giving them that sense of love and trust and support and respect. How can schools support this telling a story version, right? Students need to encounter unstructured information in large amounts because that's the information environment that they're in. And they need guidance in that encounter. They need to figure out research, they need to figure out different kinds of literacies, they need to figure out how to separate kind of the wheat from the chaff and figure out what they should be paying attention to. They need our help in all of this, but they also need to be a little bit overwhelmed and encounter it on their own. And then finally, maybe the toughest is this question of why are we here? What are we doing? What's the point B that we're trying to get to? How can schools address that? How can schools address people's own missions and get them to reflect on their own missions and what they think is most important? So address motivation and address this idea of how do you form a good question? What's an important question? What do I want to spend the rest of my life doing? So, a couple of really quick examples just from my own reporting in the last couple years. This is a nonprofit called Turnaround for Children, started by a doctor who witnessed kind of the same cluster of trauma, toxic stress, adverse childhood experiences that impacted on low-income communities. And she kind of said, we can do a both and, we can do a 360 workaround in the public schools. And what we can do is we can redo the discipline. We can make the schools very calm, very safe, very ordered places. We can give every adult in the building tools for dealing with trauma, understanding the difference between, a time out and a time in. And we can give the students directly, we can give them mindfulness training. So every day the students are doing Headspace app. And they're learning to be quiet. They're learning to hear the silence in their own heads. This is the school that I visited was a school in the very, very poor school in the Bronx. The school, I talked to a mom at the school who her daughter was now in 5th grade. When her daughter was in kindergarten, the atmosphere of the school was such that there was a fist fight in the audience at the kindergarten graduation ceremony. So she took her kid out of the school, put the kid at the school across the district. Really tough because she was working as an emergency room dispatcher, so she was working really long hours, but she wanted her kid to have a good education. Now she's come back to this school, not because the test scores are better, because they're not yet, but because it's a calm place, it's an orderly place, it's a loved place, it's a place where people are respected, parents, kids, and the teachers respect each other. And finally, so they do the mindfulness training, they do the discipline, the social and emotional, and they do an explicit curriculum around neuroplasticity. So they teach the kids about the brain science of resilience. They go right to the kids and say, this is what research says. You can get better. Your brain's like a muscle. You can get stronger if you try. You can get calmer. People get better even when they're sad. So they teach the kids that lesson explicitly as well as trying to get them to experience it. A second example, I think of a really good kind of this school excels on giving a hug and telling a story and on solving a mystery. It's the Evergreen State College program in Tacoma, and it is designed from the get-go. The founder started it at her kitchen table because the Hilltop neighborhood, which is a historically black working class neighborhood, didn't have a four-year college at the time in the 1970s. And they applied principles that Evergreen State College uses of independent study as well as collaborative study. Every student kind of designs their own program, and they design it to address a problem in their community. So the motto of the college is enter to learn and depart to serve. And the students, they're all working together, so they're all really learning to support each other. And they, one of the students said, I brought my baby to class, I don't know how many times, and everybody held my baby. If you miss class, one of the other students will text you and find out what's wrong. We're all teammates here. And at the same time, what you see is this incredibly high level of rigor and critical thinking from every single student that I talk to, and these are people from their 20s to their 60s, who many of whom are thinking about things for the first time. So they're being really challenged, and they're being challenged in a really supportive atmosphere, and it's all to a purpose. And the purpose is just discovering their own purpose and tying that to a broader purpose in their community. And they have all good stats too, good numbers. You can look up the numbers, best numbers. You know, this almost feels like an afterthought in a way, although I don't mean it to be, which is technology, right? Technology and learning, which is your, you know, one of your main topics here this week. How does this fit into these 4 tasks of education? Neither of the examples that I used particularly are focused on technology, but I do think that they can fit in. You know, the physical, the hands-on, I see that very supported in maker culture, DIY, projects that take technology into the physical spaces, or simply where you're working on craft, and the tech aspect of it is you're recording what you're doing, you're sharing what you're doing. It's in an online community. You're remixing and you're helping with other people with projects, right? It could be something very, very analog, but there's a digital extra component to it. How tech fits into the social and emotional stuff. I mean, to me, this is about the dialogue that's taking place online, where people are emphasizing the personal and emphasizing the human and emotional in ways that I haven't seen, and I don't think it's a total coincidence. I mean, we focus so much on kind of the cesspool of social media, and this is true for adolescents as well as adults, that, you know, the negative things that come from it. But I think what we're increasingly starting to see as well is that it forces you to be much more intentional about how you communicate. And there are refinements of communication online where people are finding solidarity, and they're using it to talk about mental health, they're using it to talk about identity, to connect and to try to be supportive of other people. You have to go, you know, it's the flattening of digital communication is such that you have to work really hard on the warmth and on getting the human aspect across. But it's a skill that we all need to learn. And I think we are all learning it. We're learning it quickly and slowly. There's actually a piece of research that came out just today from Vicki Rideout, who does some of the best research on digital media and adolescence. It has adolescents talking about depression and anxiety in social media, which is a topic we've heard a lot about. But one thing that they asked them was, have you ever reached out for help on social media? And a lot of them said yes. A lot of them said, social media is a place that I turn to. You know, if I feel like I don't have anyone to talk to, I can usually find someone online who will help me. Other previous researchers said, you know, people online are mostly kind. So thinking about how we can rework the realm of social media and the emotions that we get from it, it's not just about staying off it or detoxing, but it's about reestablishing rules of communication. And I mean, there's people here that I mostly see on Twitter, and I feel like that is a good groundwork for a type of a relationship that can be important in your life. So the unstructured information challenge is pretty obvious. We're inundated with information online, helping digital literacy, understanding decoding fake news, understanding, you know, challenges that are true research challenges where the answer is not in the back of the book, but we're discovering and creating together that, you know, very much should involve digital resources and open resources. And then finally, this question of meaning making. And this is where it gets back to kind of the mission of yourselves as educators. There is a big conversation going on right now about technology and ethics. It's blown up in a way that I don't think many people could have predicted, except for the ones who have been Cassandras or been waving the flag for years and years. But you know, but there's this talk. You know, there's Sophia Noble. There's Algorithms of Oppression. There's Siva's book about Facebook, and all these different critiques going on about how you know, racism and inequality is baked into the algorithm, how we need to change diversity in tech, how we need to have different ethics and different guidelines for more sustainable technology. And you know, it's up to you all, I think, to initiate and to continue these conversations. I don't want to lay another thing at educators' feet, because it always seems like people turn to the teachers to solve every problem in society. But I do think that, you know, given where you're at the interface between, you know, people's first engagement with technology in a context of being thoughtful about it and asking questions about it, that we have a right and a duty to bring the sense of mission into this conversation, and not just as a receptive thing of how do we think about the tech that's being given to us or built for us, but how do we want to build it? How do we want to use it? What's it for? What's the purpose? And I mean, that's the principle that I kind of inculcate in my book, Screen Time, The Art of Screen Time. I talk about parents and screens and children and screens, but really what I hope is that, you know, in the hearth, in the digital hearth, in the home, in the family, where we care so much about everybody's happiness and everybody's future, can't we have a discussion about how to use technology that's mindful and that is positive, and use it for those purposes, and not just use it to, you know, a lot of people in their families, in their homes, parents and children use technology to escape from each other. But we hope to be able to use it to connect with each other. And, you know, we have such, as parents, we have such fierce empathy for our children, and we want them so badly to be happy. And I think we can harness that emotion and that feeling, and a little bit of what educators have as well, which is, you know, to think through a way of using it more positively, to bring you happiness, different kinds of technology, different ways of using it, and for a better purpose, ultimately, for everyone. So, you know, when I think about technology in education, I always think about Seymour Papert. And even though we're in this time of like seriously questioning what we use tech for or why we have it, his vision is a touchstone for me when I think about it's very hard to do intellectual work without the digital realm. We don't really want to go without it. That would be a hobbling. We just have to be empowered in how we use it and to design it in a way that is empowered. And, you know, he really was a person, a figure who straddled the worlds of learning and development and in humans and also artificial intelligence. So he really foresaw a way that we could have this harmony and to be able to ride the technology and not have the technology ride us. So I think it's important, you know, it's important to realize that it is possible to do this, and just because history has gone one way doesn't mean it has to go that way always. There's different narratives in history that we can turn back to try to imagine the future a little bit better. And yeah, I think that's where I wanted to leave it. And I wanted to leave you, I wanted to find a picture. I didn't have time to do an illustration. I wanted to find an AI picture of a monkey hugging a robot. And I found this incredible fable. This is from a year ago. It's a nature story, nature movie, nature series that was aired on the BBC, where they created a robot monkey, a baby robot monkey with a hidden camera to film the monkeys in India, so the baby monkey could be amongst the other monkeys and film them secretly. Secret surveillance, baby robot monkey. But here's what happened, what they never expected. The monkeys started to show this compassion and this care for this baby robot, and they went up to it and tried to hug it, and then it tipped over and like fell from the tree and just fell on the ground stiffly. And so this is like a video of them. This is the one of the monkeys picking up the corpse robot monkey, and just who among us has not been in this position? No, but so we don't want to waste. Okay, maybe they wasted their compassion. Maybe they were being duped, or maybe they showed us all that lying and misrepresenting yourself as a technological thing is not a good idea, and really the monkeys are the ones that have the moral high ground here. That's what I submit. And I would love to get your thoughts and your questions. Thanks.
Oh, wait, I'm going to have to climb over this.
Thank you so much for your talk and for all your good coverage of this important issue from a critical perspective. I want to ask you to clarify a comment you made earlier on about computers being homeschooled, right? That computers are in a better situation because they're being homeschooled. I think you qualified that by saying they're being homeschooled all the time by us. But I noticed on Twitter that comment has been retweeted, and I think it says, you know, computers are better educated because they're homeschooled. And I just want to ask you to clarify, is that the argument that you're making?
No, the argument that I'm making is that there's no boundaries in how we're educating computers. We're giving them information all the time. It doesn't matter if it's day or if it's night. It doesn't matter if it's the school year or not the school year. There is always information for computers, and we're always feeding it to them. Is that enough?
Yeah,
okay. What I thought you were saying. Yeah.
Hi, also, thank you. My question is about addictive design. When you have bad actors who are in it for the profit motive, how do we balance that kind of algorithmic invention with this talk?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So gamification or addictive design is it's a form of extrinsic motivation, and you're purchasing the engagement of the user or perhaps the learner. There's a lot of educational technologies that are designed that integrate gamification and addictive design. My feeling about it is a little bit paradoxical in the sense that I'm not actually black and white for it or against it. I think it's really important to understand it and understand how it works. And I think it has a role in people's lives. I think that there's such a thing as informed buy-in. The question, should we ban it? Should we ban this set of design techniques that we find to be manipulative? Is a question. What are we manipulating people into? What's the underlying harm of the behavior? Is it just that they're giving over their autonomy for this portion of time to this activity or to this experience? Or is there something underneath it that's like even worse than that? So, so gambling is a really terrible application of addictive design because you lose all your money, and it's one of the most highest suicide rates of any addiction, highest death rates of any addiction. So that's really terrible. If somebody's using addictive design in a way that is surrounded by an atmosphere of true choice, where you say, I'm going to go into this addictive design experience and I'm going to come out of it, or I'm going to create a Ulysses contract for myself, or I'll have some time inside the addictive design system, and then I'll come out. I feel like there could be a place for that. In other words, if you want to learn another language and you're going to use a very gamified app to help yourself or to trick yourself into that habit, I use my step counter on my phone in that way. It's rewarding to me. There's badges and there's things like that. I don't think I'm totally giving up my autonomy to do that. You could definitely make arguments about people's developmental stage. Where are they in terms of their brain development? Can they understand what they're doing or why they're doing it? And so that's why, advertising rules for children used to be different on television shows than they are for adults. I think that the more people understand about addictive design and where it's applied, I think there very well could be regulations around where it could and should be used. But I don't foresee it. I don't know that I would definitely advocate for getting it out of all ed tech, for example. Maybe it should be labeled. Maybe it should be limited. Maybe there should be, it's an ingredient in a way. And it's similar to addictive design in food, right? I'm not a full libertarian, but I think it's fine for people to enjoy Doritos, even though the Doritos are extremely addictive. I think it's fine for them to exist in the world. They should exist maybe in a universe of choice. They shouldn't be people's only choice. People shouldn't be steered to them. They shouldn't be, deceptively advertised. But it doesn't mean that we having created this thing that we should ban it forever.
I was wondering if you were familiar with Jane McGonigal on gaming for social good, and if you had any thoughts on, because that's what based on your answer to that question, I see you nearing her position on harnessing the power of gamers to be able to solve the world's problems.
I think it's really interesting. I'm not personally a gamer, so I don't find it personally compelling. I also think that there's a spectrum of types of games, right? So there are kind of the casual game and the more complex game, and then there's the truly kind of ludic game where you're creating the game yourself, or you're creating it as you go along. And so I feel like there's different levels of gamification that play into different levels of development, or different levels of complexity, or different levels of imagination. And I think, again, they all have their places. I mean, she's constructing a narrative about the potential and trying to get people to see the positive potential where other people only see the negative potential. And I'm just kind of saying, like, all of these things can exist, and we have to apply our moral imagination to emphasizing the good ones.
I have a question, which is, you started your talk by talking about your role as a journalist and your role as a journalist sitting alongside educators. Can you talk a little bit more about, so oftentimes there's a kind of an almost adversarial role set up between academics and journalists, where journalists are translating and then accused of translating poorly the work of academics. And can you talk a little bit more about what that relationship looks like, or what it should look like, or what it looks like for you between journalists and educators?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I feel like I've sat on all sides of it. You know, in other words, I've been pilloried for being, like, for mistranslating, or for misappropriating, or for being too cozy with academics, or you know, fill in other criticisms here. They're all valid, and at times. You know, journalists, our job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And amongst academics, both afflicted and comfortable people exist, sometimes within the same person. And so I think that in my, sometimes I'm translating people's findings. Other times I'm reporting on people's actual activities, their practice. And if I'm translating their findings, I have a duty to sort of be faithful to the work as the field understands it, because the field understands it in a way that I never will. So I have to kind of see what is the mainstream of thought here? Is this the fringe, or is there critics? You know, I've done a good amount of reporting on grit, and I kind of thought, I gave some thought to, like, where I was in the hype cycle on it. So there'd been a lot of reporting on grit. Grit was on the cover of Time magazine. Grit was on 60 Minutes. So I was like, okay, let's poke a little around in grit and see if there's important critiques here. And I had the patience to get into the weeds, so I'll do it. Sometimes it's different. It's like, here's a little idea that not many people know about, and if all I'm doing is, like, pooping on it, like, why even bring it up? People aren't going to hear about it except to say that I don't think it's a good idea, but that's not important. So especially as I'm reaching a broader general audience with NPR, I have to think really carefully about that duty, and it's something that I do think really carefully about. I also have duty, in reporting on education, I'm not just reporting on academics, I'm reporting on students. Their experiences are really important. They deserve to be centered, and sometimes they diverge from what academics think about the same institution or even the same class.
Thank you.
I would love to invite you to lead my next department meeting based solely on your assertion that schools need more hugs. That alone, come to my department, please. Along those lines, though, balancing the need for empathy and hugs in the school environment, and then the need for some of us to still maintain a professional identity kind of thing. Can you say anything about, because, I mean, your professional world is different than my professional world, and yet you're still advocating for more hugs. I would love to hear your thoughts on how that plays out, what that looks like, or how those two can coexist. Is that even a fair question to ask?
No, I think that's a great question to ask. I think we all struggle with the dividing line between the personal and professional, and particularly, in the Me Too era and, era of complicated identities, the point is that people have emotions, and their emotions are engaged in the process of learning. It's a very vulnerable process. And you don't have to be necessarily a friend or a confidant, but to be a person who's trustworthy and communicates that it's safe to have emotions and express emotions, particularly with regards to, so for example, I'm going to go back to the Tacoma project, the Tacoma program at Evergreen State College. The math professor there is particularly astute, and he has a, he's noted that he has these adult learners, right? So their average age is in their mid-30s. 92% of them, roughly, 23 out of class of 25, have very negative experiences with math in their lives. They have failed at math, and they have been told that they're not good enough, and it is a stumbling block for them when they think about going back to college. So he assigns them to write about it. They write a math memoir, and they write about how they feel about math. And they share with peers, and as well as with the class. And he says that it serves a twofold purpose. One is to, acknowledge those feelings. So it's okay to have feelings about math. Everyone has feelings about math. It's totally normal. You're not alone. And it helps him see them differently because they're expressing another talent that they have, which is writing and telling a story about themselves, which is a place where a lot of them feel more comfortable than they do doing math. So that's a great example. That has nothing to do with a physical hug, but it has to do with it has to do with your emotions and your humanity, that you always are a full human being. And you're not the sum total of your, just who you are in that one subject or in that one class. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. I was really interested by what you said in your talk about the idea that perhaps we're scared of children, and that's why we're moving towards teaching AI. One of the things that raised for me as a question was whether this engagement with AI is perhaps a natural outcome of how we approach a lot of education in various countries, and the idea of standardization and homogenization and reaching set things and removing difference. I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on whether it's possible that our engagement with technology and all these exciting ways of teaching that are happening with technology is perhaps because it gives us a way of being more in control, of knowing what the outcomes can be, and of reaching that space of homogeneity.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and provocative question that's worth exploring. In some ways, I want to draw a line and say that there's almost like a 20th century approach to using technology. It's more mechanization. It's something we complain about a lot when we talk about the industrial era model of education, and that's what you're talking about, the standardization of outcome. And the production of it at scale, the creation of efficiencies, the productivity. I used to talk in my presentations about, is there a Moore's law for education? Could you possibly raise something called quality and also raise something called output without raising cost? I just think it's a really narrow way of thinking about it, and it's not up to date with the latest technology, because as I've mentioned in the presentation, we're not creating standardized outcomes for AI. Every AI is its own little flower. They're all doing different things. And that's what's so amazing about it. It's the level of creativity and really heart that we're investing into those challenges. The idea of a standardized AI is not really what they're aiming for. They're aiming for this creative AI. So then it becomes kind of like, well, it's like tag sale tech that we're giving to the kids, which is it's like last month's tech. It's like tech about faster and cheaper and better and kind of there's logistics. We can't denigrate logistical innovations, like the things that make, a more efficient back end, or, batch processing, or streamlining certain things in education. It doesn't feel revolutionary, but it does make a difference sometimes in the way that teachers can, free up their time for different kinds of things. But I think hopefully we're getting to a less simplistic way of thinking about that. But the reason that we give, for example, a computer-based multiple choice tests to kids is not because they're high tech. It's because they're cheap. And they're very easy. Yeah, they're cheap in that term, because the most expensive resource in education is people. So they're cheap to grade. They're cheap to make, not because they're actually technologically advanced. But I think it's a really, but back to this question of are we afraid of the kids? It's also we're contemptuous of the kids. Right? We don't think they're as worthy. We're not behaving as if they're as worthy of the resources that we have and the energy that we have.
There almost seems to be a conviction that they're less fixable than the AI, and in some kind of way.
I got into this with the creators. So the SpaceX challenge, and there's a SpaceX for Education challenge. where they define the problem as create a piece of software and a ruggedized tablet that you can literally drop out of an airplane into a village with no schools and teach kids how to read and write. And I just pressed them on this question of why do you think that's more feasible somehow than training a generation of teachers? which also would have other good effects, like having locally trained skilled workers, like creating employment for people. Why do they think this is more feasible? And you see it with Bridge International Academies. This is not an imaginary thing. This is a real thing, right? They're giving tablets to people. They've de-skilled the profession of teaching, essentially. They pay them less money, and they give them a little bit of technology, and they sort of combine those two things together. And I like to say, it's like they've created, the hybrid that they created is kind of like your enterprise car rental person. Like they have a menu on a screen and then a person, and sort of together, it's like less than the sum of its parts. Yeah.
So I think you've said a few things that seem to maybe better synthesize or clarify something you said early on that I have a question about, which is pitting the training of robots against the training of children. And if we're so worried about the morals and ethics of AI, why are we investing in training robots instead of training humans? And it seems to me, full disclosure, I'm a data scientist. It seems to me that by investing in AI, like you're saying, compared to like the 20th century idea of tech, and I really like this phrase, tag sale tech, like that's amazing. But the contrast here, you really are investing in the engineers and the data scientists and the analysts who are doing this work. Within the tech world, they're on average paid the best, have the best work-life balance, and therefore the most time with their kids if they have them. And they are, shoot, I lost, it's been a long day. But you are investing in people who are doing this creative work and giving them opportunities to pass that on. Oh, and the latest Stack Overflow developer survey, this is what it was, they're the most likely to be concerned about the ethics, as opposed to, say, mobile developers who are concerned most about the singularity when it comes to AI, not actually the ethics of how this data science is used. Mm-hmm. It seems like when you invest in AI, you are investing a lot in people, and a lot in people who care about ethics and passing that on, more so than the tag sale tech and the 20th century tech. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about how these synthesize here. Yeah, that's my question.
I think it's a great time to be working in AI, and I think that it's not bad that we're investing in those people. It's really just a contrast between how we invest in those people and how we invest in the people that teach our children. It's not bad that those people have good jobs. They should have good jobs, and they should be thinking ethically, and I'm glad they have good work-life balance. My husband is home right now with my children because he works in AI and he has a good job, and that's great. But more broadly, it's not to take anything away from them. It's just to say, what are the priorities and where are we putting the resources?
So it's not so much robots versus kids as it is the way we treat the data scientists and the way we treat teachers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Where was it?
Yeah. Oh, there's yeah.
Hi. Yeah. So I was curious about the kind of research and reporting you did about the public school that was kind of focusing on helping children deal with trauma and their mindfulness. And I'm curious in your research and your reporting if you've seen the impact on that kind of work in maybe special education or individuals with learning differences who often tend to get sort of pushed to the side in this era of like standardization and homogenization.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the nonprofit Turnaround for Children works in a bunch of different public schools, actually. And the particular school that I visited in the Bronx has a really high percentage of kids with IEPs, probably maybe even like 1 in 3. So, what is there to say about that? I mean, I think that, can you rephrase your question a little bit? Like, yeah.
I just was curious if any of those like techniques or the things that the school focused on then like maybe led to a difference in the way that students with IEPs were treated, or
Yeah.
maybe even like a lack of need for that IEP later on, because so many of those accommodations deal with that kind of like affect.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's a great question. Right. I think if anything, it's almost like the bleed of the IEP approach across more students. So, you may or may not be, below a certain line academically. And again, this is a school where there's single digits of students who are performing proficient on state tests. So it's really hard to say what the academic standard per se is in the class, but it's more like everybody gets an accommodation. And I like to think it too, like the reframe for me in being in different trauma-informed classrooms and places where, for example, they're teaching teachers mindfulness, is the word behavior comes from this behaviorist approach. So we only care about what the student is doing physically or saying. We don't care about what they're thinking or how they're feeling, and we're not interested in that. And so the question of how do you create order and routines, and how do you have accommodations for students that are individualized without necessarily labeling or diagnosing them, but just saying like this, I care what's going on with you, I care what happened to you, I care if you had a rough day, if you spend a night in a shelter, if your mom's gonna come home, like these are the things, right? So yeah, I think that approach I see gaining ground in a lot of schools, a lot of places, and it's not necessarily about, this question of whether to use IEPs or not is interesting, but it's not necessarily about the label or the diagnosis that the kid carries with them, and it's more about we care about what's up with every kid, which is always unique. Right, that's very true. Yeah, that's very true. And because we're not peering into their brains and really identifying what's going on with any sense of certainty. I did a great interview earlier this year on twice exceptional children, which they're starting to be much more interested in children who are both quite gifted and also have some disability. And, sometimes they're hiding in the gifted program, and sometimes they're hiding in the IEP program, and sometimes they're hiding in the middle of a classroom with unrecognized issues either way.
Hey, I was just wondering, do you think there's any hope to make LMS systems better at hugs, stories, and mysteries? Through AI or otherwise?
That's a great question. What do you think? Well, look, there's this whole very well-paid job category called user experience, right? Which is supposed to be like we care about the experience of the user, and that includes like how they feel and whether they know what's going on, whether they're confused. I don't think the way forward, what they're trying to do with we'll teach the AI to recognize your expression so that you're looking at it. If you're looking at it with your brow furrowed, that means you're unhappy, and then it's going to have a bot to check in on you. That seems like a very roundabout way of attacking the problem. But improving user experience, absolutely. Of course we could improve user experience. We could always improve user experience. It's usually done through people. It's done through, perfectibility with people and systems, and improving the system and talking to people about how their system was improving and making people responsible for the experience of people using the system. But I think that there's, that's definitely a centaur type thing. And maybe taking more of the burden off of the person who is in charge of your experience. So for example, this is super low tech. I did a story on the BAR method, which is a highly randomized controlled trial validated method of reducing the dropout rate, zeroing in on the 9th grade year, because the 9th grade year is like year 0 for dropping out. If you fail a class in your 9th grade year, it increases your chances of dropping out of high school by something like 40%. So they created this system at a school in Minnesota, and it literally involves it's just a beautiful marriage of data and hugs. It involves every adult. So first of all, they create a block system where all the 9th grade students have the same teachers for core subjects, which is like a scheduling feat. Then they take those core teachers and the school support staff, like the drug counselor and the admissions counselor, the social worker, and those people all meet every week. And they meet around the students, and they code the students from 0 is thriving to 3 is in a crisis right now. And they talk about, and they're looking at the school grade book, which is not a super complex system. And it's not that great to use if you're like a parent trying to figure out what's going on with your kid, but they know it really well. They also have a Google Doc spreadsheet, and they're coding the kids, and they're looking at things like, oh, they had 17 absences and 16 tardies, and they acted up in your class, and they also came into my office and said that they had a fight with their mom, and they just triangulate around. But what they also do constantly is focus on the student's strengths. So if you even as you're talking about this kid that you're really worried about that you think is going to drop out of school, you also have to talk about something that you perceive as a strength in them, whether that's a supportive grandparent or they love music or they're funny. And you're constantly doing that because if you don't know the kid's strengths, that means you probably don't know the kid very well, which means you can't help them. So they're using data, and they're using their emotional attachment and their sense of responsibility, collective responsibility for the kids. And they find startling things sometimes. There was a school in California where the people got together in block meeting, and there was this group of 3 freshmen, and one person said, oh, you know, these kids, they're always late on Mondays. And oh yeah, they're always skipping school on Fridays, freshman girls. And oh yeah, they have a lot of dress code violations for some reason. And oh yeah, they don't sit with their own friends at lunch, they sit with these older boys. So they put this together. Within 3 weeks of school, they figured out these kids were being sex trafficked. And no one person had all that information to make that determination. But it was done through data, very simple data, and through talking. Maybe less features would be better in the LMS. I don't know. Forcing people to talk more.
I'm bad with microphones. Is it working? Okay. Let me add my thanks to everyone else's. This may be really easier. It may be really hard. And it's a little self-serving, but I wanted to ask you if there was one thing that you wish that educators would read, watch, listen to. So I'm thinking one book, one article, one website, just anything that you think I really wish that all educators would encounter this thing. Go.
Thank you. That's a great recommendation. All my books. I mean, the book that changed how I thought about education and got me interested in education as a topic was Deschooling Society. And I think it's really prescient with regards to educational technology and the role of education, and also like the rent-seeking behavior of education as an institution. The idea that it is, those of us who are engaged in this project tend to also overlook like the damage that we're doing as well as the good that it brings. And what if there, just as a thought experiment, what if it was all gone? Is a good one, I think. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. That's a great question.
Hi. First, I want to thank you for making a whole new talk for us and, testing out new ideas. I do have a slight objection to the construct, which is I went to a really great talk by, spacing on her name right now, but Meredith Whitaker of the AI Now Institute, where she gave a lot of case studies of how AIs are actually being trained really horribly by a lot of really biased data sets, and given those objectives, and then their objectives reinforce the bias of the data. And then to add to that, I think, the trainers of AIs are probably one of the least diverse fields around. And then So just that construct of AI is it's certainly being really heavily invested in and getting a lot of resources as opposed to human education, but it's not necessarily done in the best way.
That's a really important counterpoint. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes. I focused on the challenges that I find most interesting in AI, which I believe to be some of the frontiers. They're not the ones that are most easily monetized, and we do see that the things such as the systems that are being used by governments and the systems that are being used by commercial operations, like the ones that show you which flight based on your browsing history and the price of the flight, those all have a ton of, the world's bias baked into them, as does education, right? And the teaching force is also very undiverse, as is the AI. I mean, if you pitted them against each other, I think the teaching force, the K-12 teaching force in the United States is the most gendered profession. Kindergarten teachers are like 99% female. And they're still 80% white, and that hasn't really budged in a generation. So yeah, that's an endemic problem. I think bias in society is being replicated in the training of robots as well as in the training of people, and that's very important to point out. Yeah.
Thank you. This might be a little too niche or something, but I'm thinking about centaurs. Right?
Awesome. As long as it's not Bigfoot.
Right. Oh, well. And so I think about a lot of these issues, as I imagine many of us do, through Donna Haraway's conception of a cyborg. And like that I kind of grok, because I'm the brain, and I have a robot eye, and like robot legs, right? With a centaur, that's a chimera. That's a combination of two organic beings, right? So there's a sort of parity there that's interesting. But then I'm thinking about like centaurs. Okay, so human AI. I guess I'm the butt, right? Like so, like, oh, centaur, you're the big human part on top. Like, no, this is the smart thing, and I'm the legs that move it around, right? So I don't know, like.
I don't know.
I
don't
well,
think
that's
that's
right.
how
That's
it's supposed
the
to
question,
be.
though, right?
No.
I mean, it would be awesome to have 4 legs, I guess, right? And Fantasia dancing and stuff. But like, am I the human part of the centaur, or?
Yes, I think you're supposed to be the human
Well, you're
part.
supposed to be, but I don't know about that.
Okay, no. This is a really great point. It's also hilarious, but it's a really great point, because the point is we're also concerned about general intelligence, right? Coming, and the super intelligent AI. In the meantime, we're like ignoring the fact that we're allowing ourselves to become stupider, because we're allowing ourselves to be constantly distracted. We're allowing ourselves to be constantly overwhelmed by information. We're allowing our lizard brains, or whatever you want to call it, that's not a great construct, but we're allowing our impulses to take over in the short term versus the long term, even though we have very different long-term goals than what we choose to do in the short term. And so it's not so much that the AI is going to overtake us in intelligence as that we're making ourselves stupider as the collective intelligence gets stronger. So this kind of gets into the I guess what I'm positing is, like, our ultimate function as human beings is going to be continue to work on this mission piece, the whole vision thing. What's the purpose? What's the point B? What are you trying to get to? We have a lot of answers that come from our quote unquote base animal nature of what the purpose is, which is like dominate, destroy, right? And then there's these questions of could we achieve a higher purpose as a civilization, like saving ourselves from climate change, or reaching other civilizations, or many other things. So yeah, pointing out that you can't be sure which is the top end of the horse is a really important critique. I'm glad that you added that.
And on that note, we have a Dungeons and Dragons League meeting right after the.
We have time for a couple more questions if there are questions.
Hi, thank you. I was recently up at a conference in Canada, and it was faculty from education across the country, and they were sitting there discussing why they couldn't write a book to connect with educators. And I'm wondering, based on your experiences, can you maybe give us some insight on how we could connect with educators, and what in this day and age in 2018 would be the best way to connect and engage with educators today?
For what purpose?
For telling us your experiences and your perspectives in educational technology.
I mean, is this do you guys have a particular set of ideas that you're trying to impart, or is it a dialogue you're trying to start?
Well, in their case, it was research. I disagreed with them and told them there's this hashtag called EdChat that might be a start. But from your experience as a journalist, I'm thinking, is podcasting the way to go? I don't know, blogging. What do you think is a really interesting perspective and connecting with educators. So higher ed to K-12 or K-12 to higher ed, I don't know.
So I guess, I mean, what I'm pushing back on a little bit is this idea, it's the message, not the medium, right? So like, I think the podcasting is where blogging was maybe like in 2009. It's not, it doesn't have the first mover advantage anymore. It's like harder to compete for airspace. It doesn't have that novelty. You know, Twitter has its rises and falls and its wonderfulness and its terribleness. So different mediums have different sets of utility, but the really most important thing is, what are you trying to say and who are you trying to say it to? And listening to that audience, I think, is the most important thing you can do. I don't have the key to the golden kingdom. I'm kind of in the middle in terms of like the amount of reach and audience that I command. Like I'm not someone for which a lot of that stuff comes super naturally to me, as I've found. But I think that there's connecting to your audience, always asking questions and always figuring out like how, listen to people and let them tell you where to be and then show up there. Oh, and webinars.
Oh, no!
Sorry.
I actually really like that. I like the question a lot because, I mean, there's this sort of idea that we should connect with one another. And then it ends there. Why? What are we trying to do? And I mean, that even happens here, right? Like in an environment like this, it's important to connect with one another, but what are we moving toward? What's the goal?
I mean, sometimes it's just to be together and to offer people support, you know, I mean, Twitter and personal learning networks can be great for that kind of thing. I get a lot of mileage out of email lists these days in 2018 and email newsletters. They have a little bit more intimacy and sense of opt-in and choice permission. You know, Facebook can have those moments too. It's all about how you engage. You know, they've done this research about what's people's emotional state after using social media. And if you are posting or commenting on someone else's post or answering a question, you have such a much more emotional, high, positive feeling than if you're just clicking or just looking or passively engaging. That's just kind of true across the board. And it causes kind of a problem because, like, you know, most of the people in your feed are more extroverted than you are just by power law distribution. Like, they are going to be the people that post more, and you're going to see more of the posts, and more people are going to interact with their posts, and they're going to feel better about themselves after they interact. But it's just nice to know, like, if you have a bias toward engaging with someone else, asking a question, answering a question on all forms of media, it's going to be better feeling.
Time for one last question. Cool. And if not, thank you very much, Anya.
Yeah.
Okay, so directly following this, we have a reception up in the on the second floor lounge where you checked in this morning and kind of places where you hang out. We've got some good food up there. Anya will be upstairs. We have a few books for her to sign and to give away. So if you're interested in her latest book, we'll have some copies up there for you to take a look at. So please adjourn upstairs and enjoy the food.